So we're going to get started with our next session. I'm very excited about this session. Some really interesting talks. And I'm just going to jump right into it. Our first talk is going to be a duo, Kathleen Benton, Dr. Benton and Teri Yarbrow, who will be giving a follow-up of a talk that they gave last year. If you guys weren't on the virtual talk last year, this was really, for me, an absolute highlight, very moving set of stories about some of the patients that they've both helped support in different ways. So Teri is a professor of immersive reality at SCAD, the Savannah College of Arts and Design. Came all the way out from Georgia. She's also an Emmy Award winner, right? Didn't she win an Emmy? So she has a background in television, and I think is from Los Angeles, as I recall, originally. Now is over in Georgia. And so she teaches this sort of interdisciplinary science that relates to immersive reality, bringing her background in television and media. And Dr. Benton is, as it says, their CEO of Hospice Savannah, and in that capacity has been using virtual reality, among other behavioral interventions, to support the care of patients. And the two of them have been working together, co-designing really compelling interventions, behavioral interventions and otherwise, in virtual reality to support patients in the end-of-life care and palliative care hospice. And so without further ado, I want to welcome them both to the stage to share their stories with us today at vMed23. So thank you again for being here with us.
Hi, I'm Teri Yarbrow, and I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for having us back again. And as Brennan said, I'm a VR evangelist. My class is called The Immersive Revolution, and I work at Savannah College of Art and Design, and we create experiences for patients. We have a program called VR for Good.
And I'm Kathleen Benton, and really would like to introduce my personal background today so that you know my interest in VR, which stems from really age 5, when my youngest brother, Daniel, was born with the same disease as the elephant man. So Daniel went through 110 surgeries throughout his 30-year life and thousands of hospitalizations. And that's very relevant because it was around 2014 where Daniel really got a great interest in virtual reality, knowing that being trapped in the confines of one's own bed or chair, you needed to be able to find a way to get outside and find life. And that's the value I've seen in VR from this journey we're on.
So I wanted to talk to you about some of our patients, and I wanted to start with a case study. And this was very moving to me. This was a patient that I saw at Christmas time, and her name was Roberta, and she had stage 4 cancer, and she was very depressed, and she was debilitated. And the interesting thing about Roberta is that she's a minister. And so a minister who's depressed can't minister to her congregation. This is her first experience with VR, and as a result, she experienced awe, which we're going to talk about awe today, and it took her eyes off of her diagnosis. And I really believe that that's when the aha moment can happen. And she remembered what she already knew. This is her watching Radiance. I'll show you Radiance in a minute. But she remembered who she really was, and she was ready to go back to work.
So today what we're planning to do is to walk you through our latest study on palliative care patients. But we're also going to take you back to what we talked about last conference, which was how this all started with hospice patients. And this was really a realization of the seriously ill population and the needs they have for virtual reality. And as in any study that anyone's ever done, you know, you go in thinking you know what's going to be achieved, and then your patients teach you you're totally wrong. And that's what you'll find that we learned today. But to begin, because we have such a diverse audience, I really want to introduce this concept of palliative care. We will be talking about hospice patients, who most everyone knows to be toward the end of life. But palliative care is very different. I always explain palliative care this way. If the brain is the organ for a neurologist and the heart is the organ for a cardiologist, there's an organ for a palliative physician. and that is pain and symptom management and the art of conversation. It is an interdisciplinary approach to disease. And that's important to understand because the patients that we studied were not dying. They are just seriously ill. So those are two spectrums of patient. What's also important to understand is that palliative, being very interdisciplinary, brings something that modern medicine doesn't always achieve, which is the art of more than just the medical, the sterile. It's really the spiritual component as well. And you'll find that that is a lot of what we discovered in our lessons learned in our study.
So why VR? And I'm not going to dwell on this slide because we've been talking about VR all morning, but I'll just say that we can hijack the brain, and it takes 30 seconds to believe in immersion. And this is when I became really excited about VR with my students. We were looking at a lot of the work that was going on, and the students would say, oh, we could do better looking things. And at a certain point, it wasn't about what it looked like. It was more like, what did it feel like? It also gave the sense of embodiment and agency. The other thing is, it quiets the default mode network, and that's the part of the brain that's constantly observing you and criticizing you. So mine would be like, you ate too much breakfast today. You're not going to fit into your clothes. Anyways, VR is going to silence that voice, and that's wonderful because it makes room for awe. It makes room for other things to come in, and it can also introduce a flow state. We call VR a cyberdelic or a technodelic. It can lead to transformation.
Just a little bit about the research and why we did this. I have a doctorate in public health, and really looking at the population across the United States and even outside of the United States is a tremendous aging population. So even if you think of folks around this room, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but many of us have some comorbidity. The average American, because of the aging population, has 8 comorbidities. It is the 85 plus population that is growing very dramatically across the United States. So that means we will have many, many more patients. And for any of us in healthcare, we know for a fact we will have even fewer resources. So we need to find interventions that go beyond the human and still respect the human. Hospice and palliative care already embraces that interdisciplinary look, interventions outside the box. In hospice, I have a music therapist and a massage therapist. It isn't just about tests and procedures and assessments and protocols. We've protocoled and policied healthcare to death, and now it's time to find the humanity. So our research methodology was very simple. We went into my outpatient palliative clinic and designed a survey. We started with something very, very simple. We asked about pain and symptom control before and after testing. And we learned a lot. We have several different medians to utilize patients. We have an inpatient, we have an outpatient, and we have home-based. And just with anything, we needed to take the long journey before we found the right answer. We ended up doing most of this work in the outpatient setting. We were really able to achieve better results. It seems that patients inpatient are going through such psychosis, and there's so many people in and out of the room when they're seriously ill. Because of the type patient we were looking at, it was very hard for them to add this component of intervention. Whereas outpatient, we could get them in the waiting room, a place where they're already bored to tears and would love to be distracted, and pull them into a virtual reality intervention, and we found it had great success. We had 590 opportunities to utilize patient data, and we've been doing this over the last year. We will be amending the study to go into another year because of all the barriers of patient access. But really we're, as you can see overall, able to achieve significant results on change in pain and symptoms. Beyond that, what you'll see though is that the patients we're going to show you today didn't really talk as much about pain and symptom relief. They talked more about meaning. They talked more about purpose. They took off the Oculus and would say, wow, life is bigger. Our first patient was Bernice. Bernice came to the clinic after being sent by her oncologist. She was going through regular treatments. She was not getting the psychosocial support she needed from her family. In fact, her husband was regularly talking to her about weight gain from steroids and hair loss. Her husband wouldn't have likely survived in my household. She was really struggling with his comments on a day-to-day basis. And she had actually called her oncologist with suicidal ideations. She was at her wit's end with all of her treatment and really struggling with her home environment. So she comes in to try out virtual reality and first explains herself as a hot mess physically, emotionally, or spiritually. During a short session in VR, she's in tears, realizing there's something bigger than her. The world is bigger than these problems. She says, this is what I should be doing. I'm able to be present but not be here when I experience this. I'm able to be in my body but not in my mind. Her entire day was renewed, and the suicidal ideations were cast astray because of this one experience.
So the next patient I want to talk to you about is Jane. And Jane came to the clinic in a very similar state as Bernice. And she was a younger patient, and she was suffering from hopelessness and despair. And she was also talking about blaming herself. She felt like she had let herself down, she let her husband down, she let her family down, and then she had never done VR before, but her kids had a VR headset, so she was super excited when she experienced VR because it transformed her, and she said, I wish I had this in my oncology experience. I wish when I went in for my rounds of chemotherapy that I could be experiencing VR. It would take all the fear out of it. So this is Bill, and he's not part of our palliative study. He is a hospice patient who is a gospel performer, and he just wanted to get back to his gospel music, so he was watching YouTubes all day, and this is what he was listening to. So we found Bill's performances in VR on YouTube, and we uploaded it to a headset, and we played it for him. And the result is he's crying. I mean, he's crying tears of joy. He had a transformative experience. We evoked awe. It was really amazing.
Bill became his own groupie. He was present for his own concert.
There you go.
How many of us can ever say that? So awe is something we want to focus on because it's what our patients taught us. Certainly, there was pain and symptom relief. Last year, we even talked about a patient who had such neuropathy, nothing relieved her pain better than virtual reality. But awe is what kept streaming through. My background is in ethics, and as an ethicist, I studied some of the bigger issues in intensive care units. A lot of it had to do with futility, but most of it had to do with communication. And each new patient, I would learn, there's something lacking. What is it? It's very interesting, the paradox that is technology, virtual reality, taught me that what is lacking in patient care is humanity, bringing us back to the human condition, the soul, and really treating the soul. And that's the awe, that's the wonder that we are finding. It isn't that patients need more informed consents or more options or more treatments or more specialists or more of their organs discussed as if they're a singular being, but they need more of the self brought, and that's what VR does.
The other thing about an experience of awe is the idea of the overview effect, which has been described by astronauts who go out into space and they see the Earth from a different perspective, and it produces a profound change. The need for accommodation, the need to maybe do something, a call to action for the planet. So that term, the overview effect, was coined by Frank White. So awe is the idea of being in the presence of something bigger. It could be being in space, looking back at the Earth. It could be at the Grand Canyon. It could also be being in VR VR, swimming with dolphins, or standing in a shower of light. We've talked a lot this morning. I think Brennan mentioned the medical benefits of awe and evoking awe, evoking goosebumps. It slows down your nervous system. Again, it silences that inner critic, which is so important. And awe is this profound and complex emotion, and it's considered now to be as important as joy and contentment. And it can also be at the core of transformative change, which I think is really amazing. Now new studies are showing us that that VR can be seen as a transformational tool. So this is a patient of ours that experienced awe. This is Sunny. She's in memory care, and she stayed in bed most of the day, rarely got out of bed, didn't know her name, and couldn't remember why she was even in this facility. But she would get up for VR and classical music because as a child, she loved going to the symphony. So we started to watch a lot of VR a lot of classical music in VR. So this is Bunny listening to Symphony No. 5 by Beethoven. Bunny turned to me and said, well, you know, I play piano. Would you like me to play for you? And so we got her out of her robe and we threw like a sweater over her, and then she performed Ode to Joy from memory. We were in tears. So David Yaden has written a lot about awe. He's out of Johns Hopkins, and he's using VR to generate awe and in the lab in order to measure brain waves. And we're using VR to generate awe for immersive therapy. And it's our belief that by shifting the emphasis from the illness, from the diagnosis, the minute the patient takes their eyes off that diagnosis, I have cancer, I'm going to die, life isn't worth living. The minute they shift their attention, there can be transformation, there can be awe.
So oftentimes working in the hospice world, when asked, what do you do for a living? I work at hospice, there's always this, oh, and it's not all that we're talking about, it's all poor you because you work with the dying. But it's such a beautiful existence. It's such a humbling privilege to be with those who are finding meaning and purpose in the last chapter of their lives. And when we started doing this research, it really started very anecdotally with hospice patients. And what we did was we took my hospice patients and her students at Savannah College of Art and Design, and she designed a class called VR for Good. So you have students who are never going to work in healthcare likely, coming in and learning how to create content for dying patients. Now, many people don't even want to step foot in a hospital, much less a hospice, and especially students who are going to be doing something totally drastically differently with their lives. But in this situation, we found a way to come together, and they would create content. They would create around-the-world trips and golfing and anything my patients wanted, and now we have a whole library of that. This is what these patients have taught us. We know about the 5 stages from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but there was a 6th that was added when we merged virtual reality with these patients.
So David Kessler collaborated with Kubler-Ross towards the end of her life, and he thought that the last stage was meaning, but from seeing the response of our patients, we think it's transformation. This is a study, a case study with Tom, and he's a stage 4 cancer patient, and he's suffering from tremendous anxiety about his future. And this is his first session with VR, and he's watching, we showed him some meditative experiences, and I also showed him Radiance, which was the first VR experience I created, and it's got 6,500 particles of light that just fall on you. So you're standing in a shower of light. And when he finished watching it, he said, I guess this is what a near-death experience is like. I'm not afraid to die. Let me show you Radiance. This is a shortened version.
Life after death experience study with 20,000 different folks who actually named different phases when they died. And the light is a part of that, so it evokes that emotion in our patients. And we use it regularly for them, and not only do the patients find that purpose and meaning, but so do the caregivers worried about their loved ones leaving them.
So as far as the VR for Good class is concerned, I was working with a hospice patient named Will, and he was a former high school teacher, and he had ALS, and he was in advanced stages, and he couldn't support his head any longer, and he had no mobile or motor coordination. And so VR was a real release and highlight for him. And he loved one of the student projects called Spirit of Africa, and he loved Nalu, another student project, as well as Trip VR and Flowborn, because he was able to have some agency using his breath. So I told my class about him, and they said, let's do something with head tracking. And so they created LAMPC, which is a guided meditation journey where you go through a bioluminescent cave on a gondola, and you end up on a beach. And here's a little piece of that. Well, this is Bill watching Spirit of Africa. This is the end of LAMPC.
This is the sea of lanterns. Each and every lantern was released by those who came before you. Each lantern holds a moment, a memory, celebrated and released into the sky. Take a second to reflect on a person, place, or experience that you love. Whenever you are ready to release your lantern, look at it to send it on its way. As your lantern ascends into the sky, notice how you feel. Take a moment to reflect.
It's been amazing how these students have gotten into these classes, and truly the altruism that's poured through them as they try to perfect this for our patients. So I think the benefits of collaboration have been twofold. Unfortunately and fortunately, like anything else, there have been a lot of barriers and lessons learned. One we've really named, which is that pain and symptom management certainly comes out of virtual reality. I think we're spending the day learning a lot about that. But there is something more. There is evoking awe. There is meaning and purpose that is found for patients who every day what they focus on is what appointment they have to go to or how they're going to get through their next symptom. And what they don't take time for is their life's journey and what it all means to them. And when that piece is absent, there is an air of desperation and depression that develop, and they may not even know that's going on. So bringing then this intervention changes their entire outlook on the journey and their purpose for even being in this disease process, which they may be feeling very vulnerable about. The venues certainly mattered. The outpatient was a much more important place to be. How we onboarded the patients were very important. We would never recommend this intervention just by providing an Oculus to an infusion center. There has to be someone facilitating the intervention and really explaining to the patient what they're trying to look for and asking them the right questions, facilitating some form of a certification and making sure that the people that are giving the Oculus and the experience to the patient is a key part of this being a success in any kind of seriously ill patient clinic.
The other thing that we learned is that there isn't one size doesn't fit all, that a number of our experiences are for enhancing quality of life, other experiences are for anxiety relief, pain relief, and it's also really important after the experience to sit with the patient and talk to them. How do you feel now? And a lot of times so much comes out of the post-session. So I would just want to mention that why immersion is so important for these patients, because it gets them into the moment. It helps them to remember that they are not their diagnosis. And it changes their suffering, and they can transform their relationship to their mortality, which is, if you're facing a terminal diagnosis, it's got to be the dark night of the soul. And it creates awe.
So what's next for us? Well, please take a picture of this QR code so you can help us on what's next. We'll be working on a program, Creating Awe, so we can help other facilities, whether they be infusion centers, palliative clinics, really any area where you have seriously ill folks, in maintaining some certification and training on implementing some of this licensed content in that environment. We really want to take patients out of desperation and put them into an opportunity for something more. There's no reason that that disease diagnosis should be also a diagnosis for sadness or for the end or for any loss in meaning. I mean, I certainly learned through living with my brother for those 30 years that he likely had more life in him than some who never, ever experience disease and illness and pain. And I think that, frankly, is where you find depth in all that pain. And the patients deserve to realize and know that this is a catalyst for them doing so. We'll be working on a book as well to help with that certification program. It's right now accepted by Rutledge, so we're just getting the chapters together. That'll take about 100 years, so look for that. Look for that soon.
I also wanted to mention that we were finalists for the VR Awards, which is the global Oscar for VR. And our project, the whole program, was nominated for VR for Social Impact.
And we're 1 minute, 30 seconds over, but I think that's pretty good. So thank you. Thank you.